Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to Room by Room, the Home Organisation Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with expert knowledge from professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Joustra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today we're going to be talking about ergonomics, myths and mistakes, with tips for optimizing your home office, with Dr. Nikki Weiner, who is a licensed occupational therapist, lead ergonomic specialist, and president of the Rising Workplace. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Before we get going and learning more about ergonomics, which I know I certainly need, I would love to get to know you a bit better. So do you mind introducing yourself in a bit more detail?
Absolutely. So my name is Nikki. You can call me Nikki, please. And I'm a licensed occupational therapist and the lead ergonomic specialist at the Rising Workplace. So my background primarily was in healthcare before leading into more the preventive realm of health through ergonomics. And I received my doctorate in occupational therapy from Washington University in St. Louis. Practiced for about 10 years in physical rehabilitation, helping patients recover after injury or illness. Learned a lot that informs my practice these days now in that preventive health field. And I really made that transition while I was still working in rehab. So about 8 years ago is when I started and founded the Rising Workplace along with my business partner and husband, David. We both were working in healthcare and were quite frankly becoming a little bit disillusioned with some different barriers working in that environment, and started the Rising Workplace. The rest is history.
Great. It must be good to work with your husband, or maybe not so great because work's always there.
It's interesting. So here's the thing. We've been together for a very long time, since I was 19 years old, and we met at work. So we go back to the work setting many years, almost 20 years now. So I find that has helped us in this journey, and also having very distinct roles. So I oversee our programs and our specialists at the Rising Workplace, and he is very much more the business admin side, which I am very much less interested in. So for us, it's knowing our roles, dividing our space, and having a strong foundation.
Okay.
Working together.
That makes sense. I'm not sure I could ever work with my partner, but that's because we are also quite similar, I think, in the terms of what we do. So I think there'd be a lot of nitpicking, whereas I think it's great that you've got that separation.
Right. Not that there isn't nitpicking. There definitely is, but we can manage it pretty well.
Well, that's good. So we're going to do a section called Have You Met Nikki? That's where we get to know you a bit better through some of your favorite things. So the first thing we'd like to know is, what is your favorite book?
Okay, I would say my favorite book is The World According to Garp by John Irving. He's one of my favorite novelists. He's not that prolific, but everything he writes is so deep and wonderful and intricate, and it's just all about people and families, and he just tends to go very, very deep and far, just with the ordinary, if that makes sense. He's also a very convincing writer. I find that sometimes I read fiction and I get bored if it's not convincing me. So I find myself otherwise reading a lot of nonfiction, or I love to read memoirs, but I really find that John Irving is the type of fiction novels that I really enjoy.
Definitely. I've been reading a little bit of romance recently, and sometimes I'm like, this is so unrealistic. No one would stick with you after all of this. Why would you?
Does that get to you too? Like, does it make you cringe? Yeah.
It does make me cringe. And then I'm like, okay, it's just a romance. It's fine. Just keep going. And then it gets better. But yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. I'll have to read that book for something realistic.
Yes.
And has there been a movie that you've enjoyed recently?
I have this terrible habit of falling asleep during movies. I find that I have very long days, and it will take me 4 or 5 nights to get through one movie if I'm trying. So I can't really think of one. I will say that I have young kids, and so there are a few family favorites playing in the background. The most recent iteration of Matilda, the musical that came out recently, and The Greatest Showman. So 2 musicals that, you have to enjoy a good musical. That tend to be playing in the background on weekends every year, and I enjoy that. But as far as like a real actual adult movie, I have to say I would say I'm not a movie person. I just fall asleep. I get tired at the end of the day.
Well, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I guess the good thing about musicals is that you can jump in for 10 minutes and just sing along and then leave again.
That's exactly right. I think it also plays into what I was saying about some of my favorite books, is that convincing factor. So I'm always looking for really good documentary recommendations. I'm always interested in like learning something when I watch something. Otherwise, I just fall asleep.
And do you find it realistic that people just burst into song?
See, that doesn't line up at all. No, but wouldn't it be great if that was the case? No, maybe it's just the entertainment factor.
And it's also for kids, so it's a bit different, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I think they make a lot of movies these days that really appeal to adults. Like they have these kind of undertones that the kids definitely don't pick up on, but they're catering towards the parents for sure.
I think that's good. Means that your kids can also watch them later and be like, oh, I didn't know that.
Exactly.
And what about podcasts? Do you fall asleep in them?
No, I love podcasts because I find that I can be listening to podcasts while I'm folding laundry or going on a walk. And so I really do enjoy a good podcast. Always looking for good recommendations there. There's one that I really enjoy. I believe it's recorded in my home state of North Carolina. It's called Criminal. And so it's for any true crime fan out there, but it's not all about missing people or murder. It's about really interesting crime, just, jaw-dropping type of stories. The main focus being crime. And so, Criminal, narrated by Phoebe Judge, is one of my favorites right now.
Yeah, I love that one. I love how sometimes the crime can be very unexpected or very small. It's always just an interesting story. It's not necessarily the big stories.
Right. Yes, I do love that one.
And do you have a role model?
I don't think I've ever really had a role model in a traditional sense, like somebody in the public eye that I look up to, or even an adult growing up. When I think about a role model now, I actually think about my sisters. So I have a twin sister, a half sister, and an older sister. And the short story is we had an unusual childhood, and we all are, kind of successful in what we do, and living productive and happy lives despite, a challenging upbringing. And so when I think about role models, I do think about my sisters.
And it's lovely that you've got so many role models there. You've got three women who you can look up to.
Right, exactly.
And what about a course that has inspired you?
So there's actually a conference that is generally very inspiring to a lot of people in my field and industry, and that's the AOTA conference, the American Occupational Therapy Association conference. And I just always say it's such an incredible and special thing to have that many occupational therapists in the same room, in the same conference center. We tend to all, not to overly generalize, but we tend to be a passionate group and an accepting group. And we've, had similar incredible experiences working in this profession. And so there tends to be an amazing energy when you go to these conferences. And it just feels inspiring when you're there, just to feel the pulse of it.
Oh, great. I love that. Yeah, everyone in this field is so passionate. I think that's not necessarily rare, but not terribly common.
Sure. Yeah. And even just all the occupational therapists I've worked with in my career, I would say that they're a special group. And when you get them all together, there's this commonality that when you feel it, it feels very special. And of course, to listen to the different work that's done within the field, it's always inspiring.
That's great. So what is your definition of home organization?
So when I think about home organization through the lens of ergonomics, we are thinking about arranging the space to enhance human performance related to the tasks that are done within that space.
And So can you give an example of that?
Sure. So first, you want to think about the person, or the people that function within that space, and we can think about a bit of a hierarchy here. When we're designing spaces with ergonomics in mind, or organizing spaces with ergonomics in mind, we first want to consider the person's abilities, their physical, cognitive, and so forth abilities, so that they can function within that space and perform well within that space. So a basic example, this is something that we teach in rehabilitation environments with somebody post-surgery, or maybe somebody with arthritis, is that you want to organize and arrange the space to limit the amount of movement and repetition and awkward postures that person has to perform in order to complete their meal prep activity. So that's where the activity comes in. So it's that unique interaction between a person, their abilities, and the tasks that they do, their performance within those tasks. So it really is this overlay between the person, the environment, and the tasks, and finding that just right fit for the person. There are some other things to consider too, beyond even abilities, but safety. First arranging the space so that there's no overt risk of injury. But also, I think when we're talking about the home and spaces in the home, their values around that space. So their values around aesthetics, that comes into the picture in our home environment. So how do we hierarchically design for function, performance, and maybe aesthetics, if that's a value for you? Again, related to the activity at hand. So in the kitchen, perhaps it's cooking. In the closet, perhaps it's getting dressed and, putting your laundry away, and anything that happens within that space.
So I guess it's a bit like how, I don't know, when you have a baby and then you have to pad all the corners, so that when the baby's running around, or I guess toddler at that point, they don't smack their head on everything. That's the safety part. But then the aesthetics is that nothing looks good with padding all around the corners.
That's a great example. It's negotiating those factors. And maybe another example would be somebody who had low vision and they needed to have high contrast within their environment, or somebody that was a wheelchair user. They need to have things organized and stored at their level. And that's first and foremost most important in ergonomics. But if we're thinking about ergonomics outside the home, it's more arranging and designing things to fit most people. Mm-hmm. So it's that shift. It's that shift from most people who may be using the space to you, or you and your family, or the people that come into your home and use that space.
So I guess it's like, you go into work and all the kitchen counters at work are a certain height because that's what works for most people. But then going into your own home and all the kitchen counters are lowered because you're a bit shorter. You don't want to have to, stand up and have to use a step stool all the time, speaking from experience.
Right. If you had the luxury to put in cabinets that are a little bit lower, now when you sell the house, it might be more difficult. But it is exactly that. You definitely have the concept correct. It's arranging the environment to fit the person and the activities done within that environment. And there are some, cardinal risk factors related to ergonomics that if you were thinking about arranging your space or organizing your space like a high performing factory would, for instance, you'd be looking at efficiency. So reducing the number of repetitions, for instance, making things flow in one direction related to the task, reducing the forces involved. So I can give a few examples here. Reducing repetitions. And I'm thinking about a few common kind of organizational practices that I see these days and how they fit in with ergonomics. And I think, take it as you will, but I think some are good, some are bad when you're trying to fit them into that category of if it's ergonomic or not. But a practice that I see is people that tend to bring the cereal home and put it in the clear plastic containers. And aesthetically, it's very nice, right? It looks nice. But if you're thinking about things the way that you would design it as an engineer, you're creating an extra step. You're creating an extra step in the process. So you have to then consider the values. Okay, how important is it to you? The aesthetics versus creating that extra step. Is it really going to slow you down in your lifestyle? Other things like arranging the closet, for instance, by color, that truly does increase efficiency. So you will be faster at picking out and donning your clothing when you're organized by color, for instance. And so when you think about different decision points when it comes to organization, you can think about how it impacts the amount of time it takes to perform the task and the safety. So storage of items, for instance, generally, most frequently used items should be stored within an easy reach of that human that uses the space. Heavier objects, if you keep them up high or down low, you're creating a risk factor related to the force of lifting and moving that object. Those are things that would be considered in like an industrial type of workspace. Maybe we consider them less at home, and maybe again it depends on your lifestyle how important that is to you.
Yes, I've noticed that I tend to keep heavy things on the ground because then I put them down, I have to worry about it. But then lifting them up again is so annoying. And so, I've started keeping like some of my kitchen mixes and that kind of stuff on a slightly higher shelf, so it works a bit better. So what are some misconceptions about home organization?
One that I've already mentioned is that maybe that it has to do mostly with aesthetics, and that we lose the focus of function related to the activity. So the fact that organization is all about how the space appears from the outside rather than how it impacts the performance of the activity within that space. And then maybe the other misconception would be that there is kind of a gold standard of organization. I see a lot of kind of blanket approaches, read this book, this is how you do it. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3. And I think that assumes that it's a bit of a one size fits all approach. And ergonomics is definitely not a one size fits all approach. So I think we do need to consider personal needs and the way that one person organizes their environment, according to theories of ergonomics, wouldn't be the same for the next person. So it's not a one size fits all. And we all have unique needs within the spaces that we exist. And so I think those blanket approaches kind of assume that our needs are the same. When we think about the reality of diversity, whether it's size and stature or physical abilities, there can't be one approach for all of us. And so it's about arranging and designing your environment to suit you.
So we've discussed a little bit about what ergonomics is and applying it in sort of a kitchen or home environment. But why is it important to know, to think about ergonomics in the home office?
I think the simplest answer is that musculoskeletal disorders related to our work, our computer workstations, are on the rise, and we are living in a very tech-heavy world. So if we use the computer for our work and we have a traditional desk and chair and computer setup, there are a lot of risk factors involved, especially if you are working 40 hours a week for many decades. I think you're bound to develop some level of fatigue or discomfort that potentially could turn into something more serious. So it's important for your health and your longevity in your career.
Mm-hmm. And so what can happen if you spend 40 hours a week for 40 years at the wrong kind of desk, wrong kind of computer, wrong kind of posture? What happens?
Well, cumulative stress happens to the body. So over time, simply wear and tear on the musculoskeletal system can lead to fatigue, discomfort, pain, eventually possibly disability and lost work due to that musculoskeletal disorder. So you can think of it as wear and tear in the body that happens over time due to working in awkward postures, which can put the body in a position where there's more stress on one muscular system versus another. Whereas if you work in a more neutral position, you're offsetting some of that stress to the body because it's a state of synergy, so to speak. You have better circulation to the body when you can avoid working in some of those awkward postures. And then repetition. So simply doing a task that's repetitive, typing, mousing, sedentary postures. So sitting for longer periods of time can have an impact on the musculoskeletal system. So basically all of those things that very much are in line with computer workstation work. So working in awkward postures, working in static postures, performing repetitive activities, all of that basically leads to wear and tear on the body. Cumulative happens over time, starts off as feelings of fatigue, mild discomfort has the ability to progress to something more serious, musculoskeletal disorder.
I've been working in an office a bit more. I've also been studying, and I noticed that I started getting some like pain in my forearm, I think, and I believed it was from typing and knitting. Is that the type of thing that would be common?
Yes, very common, because both of those activities are repetitive and require a lot of fine movement of the fingers and hands and wrists. So especially on the dominant side, we see people with symptoms, and it's the type of thing that you may have experienced that you feel the discomfort, but then when you stop the activity, it tends to go away, right? So then you know that it's that activity that tends to escalate those symptoms, but it's a little bit like a ghost. So if you started the activity, it kind of creeps in again. So musculoskeletal disorders, they tend to creep in and creep out of your life and something that follows you. But it's really only eliminating that activity and perhaps also practicing better ergonomics around that activity that can help you control some of those symptoms.
Okay, so I'm hoping that it doesn't mean that I have to give up working. Well, actually, I do hope it means I have to give up working, but I don't want to give up knitting. So if I can't stop them, is it just that I need to do it less, or are there some ergonomic practices that I can do to kind of help with that?
That's what ergonomics is all about, is what can we do to manage the stress that exists in our environments. And so we have to strategize around reducing some of those risks, because we cannot give up the things that bring us joy. And I'm not saying that work brings us all of us joy, but knitting and, for a lot of people, it's sports. And, we have to make a living. So how do we work around? And so, yes, it is. There are many strategies, ergonomic in nature. So sometimes it's using a different tool, a different type of needle, different type of mouse, different type of keyboard, taking enough breaks. So micro breaks is a strategy. So if you're not letting the body recover from those periods of repetitive stress, simply by, every 10 or 15 minutes, resting the hand and arm, that can lead to more stress to the body. Warming up. So you think about athletes, they will warm up before they use their body physically to avoid injury. So there are some different hand and wrist stretches and movements that you can do to help prepare the body for the stress of knitting or using the mouse and keyboard. And then awareness of posture. So understanding what is a neutral and what is an awkward posture, and aiming to support your body in a way that you're working more often in those neutral zones. And so, yes, there is something that we can do. And I think it's really powerful in mitigating some of that risk. And I would not recommend anybody give anything up, but rather change their approach to doing it.
So for someone who is, typing a lot, what is something that they can do? Is it changing, as you said, change the keyboards, or you also said the awkward positions versus a neutral position? Like, can you explain that a bit more as well? Sorry. Absolutely.
And I think it is important to kind of think about the whole body at this point, because there is such a domino effect. If you have an awkward posture at your back, or you're not well positioned in your chair, it can affect posture throughout the body. So when we think about a neutral position, when you're seated, it's imagining that your ears are aligned with your shoulders and your hips. Your hips are slightly higher than your knees. So actually raising the chair a little bit to promote blood flow kind of downward and opening up that hip angle. Your back is well supported and your feet are well supported, because if you support your body, you'll be more likely to stay in that position, in that neutral position. So it's a bit of a myth that it's about sitting up straight, actually. So it's really about sitting supported and relaxed and neutral. So you'll be more successful at achieving that ears aligned with shoulders and the hips. Hips higher than the knees, feet on the ground, when you are well supported in a chair. Your back is entirely supported. From there, you want your shoulders relaxed, your upper arms close to your body. So your elbows should not wing out. In other words, they should be close to your body. When you're using your mouse and keyboard, your elbows should stay at your side. Your forearms about parallel to the ground, and then your wrists nice and flat. So it's interesting, because I think when we are looking for a solution for mouse pain, we want to gravitate towards the mouse, and that could be the solution for many people, but oftentimes it's the chair because the chair height isn't correct. So you want to adjust your chair height so that your desk is about lined up with your resting elbow. And that creates the flat wrist. So a lot of times, if you're sitting too low in the chair, your wrists bend down as a consequence. If you're sitting too high in the chair, same thing happens. So it's the alignment of that work surface to the elbow level that will help you the most with your wrist posture. I know it's a lot to cover, but what I'm trying to say is that we have to look at the whole person and the whole workspace and not isolate just the wrist and the mouse, for instance. So there are different ergonomic mouse solutions that help a lot of people for specific issues, but we really do have to address the entire space, including the chair, the desk, the keyboard, the screens, and the mouse together. We shouldn't look at them separately.
Now, I know that you were showing us earlier, you've got a motorized desk, so it lifts and goes down on command. And I imagine that type of thing would be expensive. Same with like ergonomic chairs and having a special mouse. And is making the home and home office ergonomic, is that expensive?
It doesn't have to be. And I recognize that not all employers will issue their employees state-of-the-art office equipment, nor do all of us have the resources to purchase them. So you can be resourceful with ergonomics. And I would say some might disagree with me, but my approach in my background has always led me to be a little scrappy when it comes to making recommendations that suit everyone's budget. So I will say that the motorized desks are becoming less expensive. So they used to be really expensive. And now you can purchase a motorized desk for $150 as opposed to $1,000, which was more of, I think, how they started out on the market. But also, if you know what your resting elbow level is in the standing position, you can create a standing workstation using any amount of boxes or books or bar height, counter height tables. Again, it's just kind of knowing where your body lines up with the correct standing position.
Okay, that's great because I certainly don't want to have to get a new table because it's expensive. And so, yeah, I guess moving everything around, using books and things. I've got plenty of books. I won't miss them. Are there some other myths about office ergonomics that you have to combat often?
There are a lot of myths and fads related to ergonomics, and most of it surrounds product solutions. So first I can talk about sit-stand desks. So I happen to have one. There are, I would say it's a common view of ergonomists in my industry that a sit-stand desk does not equal ergonomic. And I think generally people believe that if you have a sit-stand desk, that you have an ergonomic setup. And so experienced ergonomists would tell you that really doesn't mean anything. So it's not the desk, it's the entire workspace and how the person interacts and adjusts that workspace. So again, there are so many different things. The kneeling chair. Now, there's a lot of functional reasons for the sit-stand desk. So for me, I do a lot of webinars. So I think functionally, if I have the option to stand when I'm presenting, it really helps my performance. It also helps me draw a boundary when I'm home. So if I put the desk up at the end of the day, I'm going to be less likely to settle into my chair during after work hours or on the weekends. And so again, functional reasons. It's not that I use the desk on a timer system where I stand for 15 minutes and I sit for 45 minutes. I think that approach doesn't consider your personal discomfort and, when your body is telling you need to take a break or change position. So a lot of misconceptions around the standing desk. Still, they get recommended a lot in the ergonomics industry for personal health reasons and performance-oriented outcomes. Some of the other items, like I mentioned, kneeling chairs, I'm not aware of an ergonomist who would recommend one of those. That is more of the fad category. Ball chairs, they brought those into offices, I think a lot, the past few decades, and they found that people fell off of them. They were a safety hazard, and they don't adjust. So you can't assume that ball chair will suit most people in a standard height desk. So there are a lot of different ergonomics fads, and the most confusing thing is that they tend to all be called ergonomic. So if you search ergonomic products on Amazon, you'll come up with 3,000 pieces of equipment that are all described as ergonomic, but nothing is ergonomic for everybody.
So how do you decide what is ergonomic for you and what isn't? Just trying it out? That's a really good question.
Okay, so it's first evaluating your workspace. So going through all the checks of the chair, the mouse and keyboard, and the screens. And then moving through that, you're addressing where the gaps are. So you could start with the chair, for instance. In an ideal office setup, you want a chair that adjusts in height. It has lumbar support and it fits your body. So the question there is, okay, is my chair satisfactory, or do I need to look for something else that fits me better because the chair that I'm sitting in is causing me to work in an awkward or uncomfortable position? And then mouse and keyboard. A lot of times decisions are made around that if you have a specific symptom related to mousing and typing. So you'll see like vertical. Have you seen a vertical mouse before?
Yes, I did see one. They look very odd.
Yeah. So it's just a mouse turned on its side. So what a vertical mouse does is, instead of using your wrist for excursions of the mouse, it uses more your shoulder and your upper arm to move the mouse. And so somebody who has a lot of wrist pain on the dominant side for mousing may consider a vertical mouse to not use those muscle groups, so that they can use the more resilient muscle groups of the shoulder and the upper arm to use the mouse. Now, somebody with a vertical mouse could develop shoulder pain. So it's still repetitive stress. So, and then there's the trackball mouse, which uses your fingers, but not your shoulder. And so you make some of those decisions based on, many times with the support of an ergonomist who can help guide you in these decisions, but based on your symptoms, your size and stature, keyboards you've seen that maybe are split. Have you seen a split keyboard before?
I have seen them online, but not in person.
Generally for like a broader shouldered person, because otherwise they're kind of rotating their shoulders in to reach their keyboard. So again, all these things are called ergonomic and people tend to jump to them, but are they jumping to them for the right reason? It takes a careful approach to determine what you need. But if you can learn more about ergonomics, then you can discover kind of where you need to fill in the gaps. And sometimes it's much easier than you think it is. So maybe it's just simply adjusting what you have, or using a few stacks of books to raise your computer screens up, as opposed to purchasing a new monitor riser. Or maybe it's behavioral. You're just, in the habit of using your keyboard and mouse too far away. You just simply need to bring it closer to your body, and, working through some of that muscle memory of the past however many years you've been working one way to do it differently.
Okay. So I guess it's just about learning more about your body and what works for you, and I guess applying that knowledge to ergonomics.
And understanding what a neutral position is. Exactly. Right. Okay. Understanding your discomfort trends, where you feel discomfort during the day, how your space is set up in relation to how it should be according to like an ergonomics checklist, and knowing what the body looks like in a neutral position.
Now, if people want to find an ergonomics checklist, as you said, do you have one? Is it sort of widely available? Where can you find that?
There are many widely available basic ergonomic assessments online. Okay. And so the ones I would go to, like in the US, we have OSHA, has an easy ergonomics for computer workstation guidance. And then the UK has the DSE guidance. So there is some regulation around ergonomics. We know that musculoskeletal disorders can be expensive for businesses. And there has been an effort under occupational safety laws to protect people against the harms of musculoskeletal disorders. And so there is a lot of free domain, kind of open domain guidance on ergonomics. And then you might find some other trusted resources, for instance, the Rising Workplace or other companies that actually do ergonomics. So I would say, don't look at advice from people that are solely selling products. I say go for sources such as Cornell University. They have a large ergonomics program. So if you're looking at your universities, your ergonomic consultants, and your regulatory bodies, you're going to get some pretty sound advice on ergonomics.
Great, thank you. That's very useful. So you mentioned some, really great ways to, make the home office a bit better. Changing the office or figuring out what works for you with the office desk, the office chair, mouses, keyboards, and things. But how can things like light, sound, and temperature impact the workplace as well?
Right. So profoundly affect the workplace, and we can start with lighting. So there's all types of different studies on how healthy lighting impacts work performance, and the impact of natural light really cannot be understated. So there's so many positive benefits of exposure to natural light while you're working. It helps with your mood and your alertness level. It helps you sleep better at night when you have normal daylight exposure to the sun. And so that is why we really want to aim to have some type of natural light in our workspace. And even some of the more innovative lighting solutions, such as circadian lighting, where they're trying to mimic kind of different tones of daylight for shift workers, for instance, they found that even that doesn't impact us the way that actual natural light does, because of the way that the light, we receive light. So we receive not only the level of light, but the angle of light. And that gives our body information to program your circadian rhythm, basically. And so many different health impacts on related to natural lighting. But it's also important to think about just other aspects of lighting within the workspace. So usually you want to have a mix of natural lighting, ambient lighting, and task lighting, but you want to make sure that you do not have glare on your screen. So ideally, it's positioning your desk and your computer perpendicular to a window, and that will eliminate glare. Aside from that, you can use a window covering to address some of that. There was, speaking of myths and fads, a lot of talk about blue light as well, especially during the pandemic. I think blue light glasses basically sold out. And it is important to control blue light exposure after hours because of that impact it does have on your circadian rhythm, which affects your mood, your alertness level, even your metabolism, your sleep at night. But blue lighting is actually not the cause of eye strain, which is one of those myths. And so we tend to attribute symptoms of eye strain to blue light when in fact it has to do with viewing distance. So simply how far the screen is from your eyes, and the fact that when you are focusing on a screen for extended periods of time, the muscles in your eyes get tired, just like any other muscles in your body if you're holding a weight for an extended period of time without taking a break. So we recommend that every 20 minutes of viewing a screen, simply looking away for 20 full seconds is enough to kind of relax and reset the eyes. And you want to look at an object that's at least 20 feet away or out a window, even closing the eyes, and that's going to help relax the muscles in the eyes. And, any amount of blue light filters or blue light glasses won't help you with eye strain, although it can be just more comfortable to wear them for some people. But it is a different thing entirely.
Interesting. And I would have thought it'd be like 5 minutes, but I guess 20 seconds is doable.
Every 20 minutes.
Every 20 minutes, yeah. Yeah, that seems doable. I'll have to go and stare out the window in a little bit.
Yes. When you look out the window, it's naturally relaxing. Think about when you look at a coastline or a sunset, we've been programmed for that to be our state of safety and relaxation, because in our earlier ancestral human days, you could focus on the horizon, you were safe. Whereas if you're focusing on something up close, like a computer screen, that could be perceived as a threat, could be a predator or a mate. Your heart rate will increase, your muscle tension will increase. And so we get kind of that unnecessary entire body tension from up close viewing. And so we really do have to take these kind of mindful moments of looking away at a micro level. So a micro break, looking away from the screen, but also, at least every 30, 45 minutes, maybe getting out of the chair and walking around for a couple of minutes as well.
I do like doing that personally. So we also mentioned that sound can be a really big impact. Is that just like loud noises? We've had construction at my house recently, and so it's been impossible to work in the office. Or is it even just like small sounds, someone playing music next door?
So it's more predictable and unpredictable sounds. And they've done some interesting studies on how unpredictable sound really can impact our work performance. And they've done these studies with nurses that work in intensive care units. So you can imagine kind of the sounds that carry through intensive care departments. There's call bells and rustling papers and people talking, and that combined with high intensity, high concentration type of work. And so they found when there was more unpredictable noise in these type of environments, the nursing staff made more errors. And so that, is a critical, it's a critical thing. And so it's this idea of unpredictable noise that can impact your attention and your errors. On the other hand, they've done some studies on more continuous type of noise. So you may have heard of white noise or brown noise or different types of continuous noise that can help actually focus us and put us at ease. It can be a helpful tool for those of us working in an environment where you have to deal with unpredictable noise, is to filter some of that out by perhaps turning on the fan above the microwave in the kitchen, or turning on a white noise app or a white noise machine. And that can be helpful. In fact, some open plan offices kind of learned this the hard way. That was a big trend in office design, was to do open plan offices. And they found that they encountered a lot of noise issue with those. And so most of those offices have installed overhead white noise systems that you wouldn't be able to tell when they're on, but you can very much tell when they're off because of the amount of noise, particularly unpredictable noise. So when it comes to sound, there's good and there's bad. The really distracting and impeding type of noise is the one that you can't predict, whereas something continuous, like a fan running, or even the sound of waves crashing on the beach. If you can imagine, if you were oceanside and working, that wouldn't distract you, right? It would just calm you and put you at ease. And so that's another example of kind of continuous type of settling noise.
Okay, that's interesting, because I find the fan in the bathroom very annoying. And even though it's continuous, I have to turn it off to work, which isn't great for our humidity levels in there.
Well, I think it brings me back to something else we talked about, is kind of personal factors, right? We all have different sensitivities to noise, and every other type of sensory input in our environment. So the fan in the bathroom, maybe it's very loud, or
it is,
or maybe yeah. So I think there is it's not always any continuous sound, but an ideal type.
I do find that playing, rainfall or, waves does help sometimes. So yeah, I guess it's just the how loud it is and what it sounds like. And the last one we were going to talk about was temperature. And it's very cold in Melbourne, where I'm at the moment, and I'm finding it very difficult to work at home because I'm just shivering all the time. So I can see how that would really impact the workplace.
That's accurate as well. So they've studied that. What they found in data entry workers is that there was a defined range, which was about, I did the conversion, 21 to 22 degrees Celsius, or around 70 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, where performance was peaked. And you got too far beyond in either direction, and you start to see productivity go down and errors go up. So there is an ideal zone. And then, of course, when we think about other type of work environments, like industrial environments, where they have to deal with temperature extremes, walk-in coolers, for instance, or working outdoors in the summer on construction, there are some other added layers of injury risk. So bodily fatigue, overexertion, escalating the the risk of developing a musculoskeletal disorder. So of course, there are also extremes outside of the office, but for the office, somewhere around 21, 22 degrees Celsius is ideal.
That seems, I don't know, maybe even a little cold to me. Maybe I'm just a warm person. I like it to be warm.
I agree with that myself. So luckily, I think it does come down to those person factors as well. So myself, I like to exist at about, 74, 76 degrees Fahrenheit. But we're all cold natured or warm natured, but I think more of these studies were done across, swaths of people. So
must be the average then.
Yes, just the average.
Okay. And I guess to improve that, it's just things like putting the heater on and billing it to work or wearing more layers.
Right. Yeah, it's easy to put on some more layers. I keep a blanket in my home office because, that's maybe not something you would do in a traditional office, is to wrap a blanket around you, but anything goes in the home office sometimes.
I have been known to turn up to meetings, Zoom meetings, wearing a onesie because it's very warm.
Right. We can do that.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not the best for office etiquette, but you know what? I'm warm and it's fine.
Right.
So what are some other things that we can do, or have we covered everything now?
So what we can do is aim to arrange and organize your space so it fits you. And so that you are working in a more neutral position. So that is going to help us combat a lot of risks that exist within our environment. The other thing that we need to do is take more breaks and move more throughout the day. So I've alluded to this a little bit, but we can't only work in a neutral posture all day long. It's not sustainable. We can't do it. The force of gravity will prevent us from being perfect all day. And we will shift and move. It's not about perfection. So you don't want to look at it from the perspective of I need to sit up straight and work in this perfect position. You want to think about it from the perspective of arranging the environment so it happens naturally. And then in addition to that, taking more breaks. Because you have to, even in the neutral position, take breaks in an alternate posture. So if you're sitting, standing for a few minutes, walking for a few minutes, if you're typing with your arms up at the desk, resting your arms in your lap. So that's going to go very far. So something like every 30 or 45 minutes, simply getting out of the chair, walking around for 1 or 2 minutes, getting a glass of water, going to the bathroom, all of this counts as movement breaks. But we are still exposing ourselves to a lot of stress related to the computer workstation, even if we think we're working in a perfect posture without taking those movement breaks. Frequency is more important than duration. So again, thinking about doing this more frequently, as opposed to just taking 1 20-minute walk over lunch, you want to break it up throughout the day. And that is the other way to avoid musculoskeletal problems related to our work.
Okay. And what do you do if, you're in an actual office, not a home office, and I guess people are always wondering what you're doing. Do you just tell them, oh, it's just for ergonomics? Or what if your office doesn't like what you're doing?
That's a good question. So I think for the most part, it can be pretty discreet, and it's not out of the ordinary that somebody would want to get out of their chair at least every 45 minutes, maybe an hour, even if it's just for 1 minute. So to me, that's not a lot, and you gain as much in productivity, if not more. And there are studies around that too. So if you need to make the case to your boss. So, but I have heard from some of my clients scenarios where it didn't fit in. For instance, a call center where really you're expected to be at your desk. You cannot get up and move because you're taking calls, you're in the middle of calls. And so there are some circumstances. And so that population would really need to focus heavily on micro breaking. So using the workflow to take those breaks. So helping them naturally occur, in other words. So if you're off a call, standing briefly until the next call comes in. And not setting like a timer, for instance, because your workflow is not going to work with a timer system, but taking every single natural recovery pause. So it's something loading up on your screen. You're waiting for somebody to attend your Zoom meeting. You're like, as I said, going to get water, going to the bathroom, all of these are natural pauses in our work that we can take advantage of. It's just about remembering in that moment, okay, it's time for me to get up, as opposed to just sitting there or maybe going to your phone like a lot of us would, right?
Yep, definitely me. Okay, great. So what is a practice that you do to manage your workspace?
Well, I put ergonomics into practice as much as I can. And again, the focus here is not me being perfect and me keeping this perfect posture while I'm working. But when I sit down to start my workday, I give a quick check of everything around me to make sure that it's positioned correctly to help me work in a healthier posture. This would be especially important for shared workspaces. So if you're in a hoteling type of environment, or maybe you work in a situation where you're using a documentation center and you need to make a quick adjustment. So actually, when I was working in healthcare, I was in the habit of doing this as well. It was really critical that when I sat down, I would make my 10-second adjustment and I was ready. So in your own home office space, things maybe drift away less, but I'm still checking in, especially at the beginning of the day.
Okay, so making sure every day that things are actually where they're supposed to be, because someone might borrow something, which happens in my house.
Right. Or you might shove your keyboard away at the end of the day because you're done with it. And then you come back to the workstation, you want to bring it back to you. So if you'd like, I can walk you through kind of the different checkpoints of when you sit down at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Okay, awesome. So first thing you'll want to assess is your chair. And I'm going to make a few assumptions here about your chair, recognizing that all of our chairs are going to be different. So I'll try and provide some workarounds when I can. But when you sit down, you want to sit supported and relaxed. So your back should be supported and your feet should be supported on the ground or on a footrest. Okay. So if you work in a dining chair or a non-adjustable type of chair, you could roll a towel and put it at your back, or you could put a small pillow or cushion at your back to give yourself some extra support in that position. So you're positioned supported and relaxed in your chair. Now you want to raise your chair, if you have a height adjustable chair, so that your hips are slightly higher than your knees and your desk is about the level of your resting elbow when your elbow is at your side. So now you're sure that you've got your chair the right height in relation to your desk. Some workarounds with chair height is if you have a chair that doesn't raise appropriately, or it doesn't adjust at all, you could use a cushion or a pillow to give yourself a few inches of height. If you have a height adjustable desk, you could also lower the desk to make up that difference. Okay. And that's going to keep your arms and shoulders relaxed and your wrists straight, that chair and desk relationship. Okay. And you might find that when you raise your chair, maybe your feet don't touch the ground. That means you're a candidate for a footrest. So keeping that in mind. So you positioned yourself in your chair, you're supported, you're relaxed, your feet are on the ground, and your desk is about elbow level. Next thing, let's look at the mouse and the keyboard. What you want to do is bring the mouse and keyboard closer to your body. So a lot of us tend to work with the mouse and keyboard farther away. And that usually creates this pressure of the wrist on the desk. So that's contact pressure. This is the carpal tunnel area here in the wrist. And you want to avoid any pressure on that area. So you can achieve that by bringing that mouse and keyboard close to your body and floating the wrists. So keeping the wrists nice and flat, not putting any pressure, anything underneath the wrist at all. Even those wrist guards or gel pads that you may have seen. So the keyboard and mouse are essentially near the edge of the desk. That's going to keep your arms close to your body. They're centered. So usually the B key centered with the belly button. That's going to prevent twisting of the trunk. And then the mouse and keyboard, when you have your elbows at your side, you should be able to make a sweeping motion with your hands. And they should be right there. You should be able to reach them. So you shouldn't be reaching away from your body to reach your mouse and keyboard. From there, you want to position your screen. So it's a single screen centered in front of your body. So you're not turning or twisting your head to view it, and raised so that the top third is eye level. So when you're looking straight ahead, your gaze should naturally fall on that top third of the screen. You can also think about your eyebrow lining up with the top line of the screen. But you want to look at that screen and how it relates to your body until you positioned yourself correctly in the chair. That's why we started there. So the screen is raised, centered, and usually about an arm's length away for most people. This depends a little bit on your vision. So of course you want to make sure that you have this discussion with your eye doctor annually if you're having any trouble viewing your screen when it's about an arm's length away. But you might make a slight adjustment in either direction, depending on the size of the screen and depending on if you're feeling that you are craning your neck forward or back to view the screen naturally. So as far as distance of the screen from the body, there's not a magic number, but usually it's about that arm's length away for most people, give or take.
And what do you do in that case if you've got a laptop? Because so I'm actually playing along with this for any viewers, as you talk about this. So I've moved my laptop closer to the edge, but the problem is now that my laptop is obviously much closer to the table than you're recommending. Just get a second screen, or what do you recommend there?
I knew that question was coming.
Yeah,
it's a good one. So, because a lot of us are working off laptops all the time. And so ideally and the least expensive solution is to plug in a external mouse and keyboard and then raise the screen with anything, a stack of books, a box. External mouse and keyboard are relatively low cost. And then it allows you to make that separation of the screen and the mouse and keyboard, which if it is your 40-hour-a-week scenario, it is definitely worth the investment. You could alternatively use your keyboard of your laptop and then plug it into an external monitor. Either way, what you're going for is the separation of the screen from the mouse and keyboard, because you really can't get into a neutral position without that. But also, I would make sure you think about duration. So how often am I doing this? Is it, if you work here and there off a laptop in a cafe or on the couch, it can be refreshing to change space. You're negotiating your daily fatigue being behind the computer with maybe your mental health. And so I think it's okay to take breaks here and there, but to have your setup, if you're settling in for more than an hour or so of work, to make that separation, and definitely in your permanent home office, to make sure that you're doing that. Okay, that makes sense.
And I'll go to my coffee shop and I'll still work there and I'll feel okay about it.
Good.
Sorry to interrupt your explanation of setting up the workplace. So you were saying, to get the screen in the right place. Was there anything after that?
And I think from there, I was just probably going to segue into talking about the laptop.
Yeah. So, okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And to think about just flexible or remote scenarios, there's a lot of trend around being a digital nomad. And so when I travel a good bit, and when I travel, basically, I will bring with me just my small external mouse and keyboard, and I can pretty much put together the rest of the setup. So I myself, I work long hours. I spend a lot of time behind the computer. And so I know there is value in finding that comfortable position no matter where I'm at. And usually I can grab a quilt off the back of the couch and sit myself higher if I'm at a dining room table, or grab a towel to position it at my back for more comfort if I'm working at a vacation rental or something like that. Use anything to raise a screen. So again, I think the mouse and keyboard are kind of the critical aspect that you'd want to travel with if you're doing a week somewhere else. Everything else, you can be resourceful.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll move on to the open mic section. That's where you get to talk about something that you're passionate about, but it doesn't necessarily have to be related to the topic. So what were you thinking about today?
I was thinking about talking about the 95th percentile illusion. And this does relate to ergonomics and some of the things I've already said along the way. But I think it's a great way to end, to just talk about kind of appreciating our differences within the space of ergonomics and really thinking about that when it comes to home organization.
Okay, so do you mind explaining what the 95th percentile is?
Yeah, absolutely. So most spaces, whether it's a kitchen or an office, the aspects of that space, how it's decided, the correct height of the counter, the correct height of the desk, the correct seat pan depth of the chair, it's usually based on standards. Standards that are aiming to capture what's called the 95th percentile. So that we want to create environments that 95% of people can use. Okay. Knowing that there's always going to be outliers, right? There's always going to be people that don't quite fit in. But what I like to mention here is that, my experience working in rehabilitation, working with all types of people, working now in office ergonomics and getting to know so many people's unique challenges within that space, it's really recognizing that to say that at any given environment would fit the 95th percentile person is an illusion. And we have to think about it this way. If you break down all the different aspects of human dimension, and it has a word, it's called anthropometrics. And so this has to do with the study of, body dimension. And actually going back to our conversation at the beginning about true crime, I think that's where the basis of anthropometrics actually comes from, is that that's how they would identify people. So before fingerprinting, they would basically measure the offender's pinky finger, measure his ring finger, measure his forearm, and that would be the way to keep a record of this person's identity with accuracy. And even that alone, you're recognizing that, okay, that assumes that we are all very different in all the different dimensions of our physical self. So it's really not only height, for instance. I think we tend to go to that with ergonomics and accessibility even. You mentioned not liking to use the step stool in your kitchen, so you'd have to reach up all the time, and we tend to go there. But in the world of ergonomics, it's so much more vast than that. Chairs are designed so that the armrest will accommodate the average forearm and the average seat pan depth and the average height. But when you start to overlay those percentiles, you start to overlay the average seat pan depth, which relates to the average length of a person's femur, and then overlay that with the average forearm length, which has to do with the armrest, and then overlay that with the average resting elbow height, which has to do with how desks are designed. You quickly lose that 95th percentile. Are you following me?
Yes,
so,
yeah, definitely.
When you overlay individual differences, it's an illusion to say that this space would fit most people. Right?
It sort of reminds me. Oh, sorry. It reminds me a bit. In high school, I had a friend. We were the same height. But when we sat down next to each other, I was so much taller than her because she had a very short torso, whereas I had a very long torso. And so while we looked the same height standing up, we weren't actually, our body proportions were very different. So I guess the way that clothes would fit us would also be very different. And I guess the way that we interact with our environment would also be really different.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And that's a great thing you bring up, because this idea of torso, for instance, when I sit with my hands naturally relaxed and my elbows at my side, my elbows are basically sitting in my lap. And if you have a longer torso, your elbows sit up higher. One of the breakdowns in design that I've seen recently, it's been a really big fad in home offices, is that these desks have come quite into fashion with these console drawers. So they have like a thick drawer right where you sit. And I've done many assessments where somebody just purchased this beautiful desk because they're very on trend right now, and they encountered this problem, not related to their height, not related to anything except for really their torso and where the elbow falls on their torso. And they've got 3 or 4 inches that they're dealing with of space that they need. And it's causing them to shrug their shoulders and lift their arms up, and it contributes to an extraordinary amount of pain. So that's like another kind of common thing I've seen recently, where aesthetics are sometimes chosen over function in design. So it's not only the physical nature of it and the fact that we can only consider, size and stature. We have to look so much beyond that, and the uniqueness of human dimension. But also in the workplace, there's a lot of talk and research now about neurodiversity. So accommodating workspaces to help the performance of all of us, how we perform cognitively and our sensory preferences and differences, like you talked about your bathroom fan scenario. So how can we optimize the workplace, not only for the intricacies of human dimension and our physical needs, but what about our cognitive needs? What about our social needs, right? I know that's been a struggle for a lot of us. working remotely, I know for me, I used to go in and work at the hospital, again, with the most wonderful group of people, wonderful group of therapists. And I really missed that, going in to go see those people, my core group. And so that's a challenge with remote work as well. And so how to kind of find this balance and these performance enhancers when it comes to doing your best at your work and feeling as comfortable as possible in your work. And at the end of the day, being able to engage in outside life activities that are important to you and improve your quality of life. You know, how can we kind of optimize our environments to accommodate that? And so there's a lot of interesting research about these different topics, but I guess the bottom line is the intricacies of our needs, and just really the takeaway is, I believe that we really can't approach this topic as a one-size-fits-all approach. You really do have to think about us within our working environments, the people around us, and the tasks that we do. And, you walk into a typical environment, or even just, the standard type of desk and chair that you purchase. Is it going to fit you? Not necessarily.
So I guess it's the one-size-fits-all solution is that there is no one-size-fits-all. It's everything has to be customizable, from the way that we work in an office or at home to the actual office environment, the desks, the chairs, the computers. Everything has to be customizable and flexible. Well,
ideally, things are as adjustable as possible, and that will fit more people. But I think it's such a challenge to do that, right? And so I'm not saying that all workspaces need to do this, because it's not realistic and it's not where we're at. But I think it's a challenge for us to think about things these ways and to start thinking about these things more. So when you walk into a space, for you, it blends in on, the concept of universal design as well. And so how can we arrange and organize spaces beyond the 95th percentile, essentially?
Okay. And do you have any recommendations, or that's too big for one person?
I think it's too big for one person, but I think it's considering all the factors within that space again. So adjustability is key. If we can, take the lead of some more innovative workspaces, they are going this route. But even from there, it's, what are the design elements in the space that don't impact people's performance, but they enhance, a certain subset. So, for low vision, for instance, is it better contrast within normal everyday environments? Is it wheelchair accessibility, or just, the position of light switches on the wall? Like these things, I think we need to look at a broader sense on more people fitting in and creating environments where more people fit in general, and accepting that, a traditional office space will not be the right fit for most of us.
Okay, interesting. And if people want to find out more about you and your website, if they want to talk to you, where should they go?
Sure. So you can go to our website, which is www.risingworkplace.com. And there's a portal where you can connect with us. I believe it's connect@risingworkplace.com, or you can submit a form to reach us through our website. We are also on Instagram at The Rising Workplace, I believe, and Facebook and LinkedIn, YouTube, I believe, as well. So if you just Google The Rising Workplace, we should come up and you can reach us that way.
Great. And we'll put those links into the show notes so people can find you as well.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much for talking to me today. I hope we talked about everything that you wanted to say, because it was very interesting, and I'm going to be, bringing some of this into my own work.
That's great. I'm glad about that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. You've been listening to Room by Room, produced by the Home Organization Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and any other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. as it helps other people to find it so we can grow and continue to bring you quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, ho.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Joustra, and thanks for tuning in.